Welcome everyone. My name is Jodie Heap. I am Scholarly Communications and Research Support Librarian, and today's session we'll be having a bit of an introduction to research data and repositories. So we're going to have a brief overview of understanding different research data types, how data management plans, how we can use them to support our planning and forward forward planning. My brain is not braining today. We're also going to have a discussion around submitting to data repositories. I'll also discuss skills our own data repository as well as external ones. And of course, we're going to be linking to the researcher development framework. So what is data? What is research data? It essentially is any information which is collected, observed, or created in the process of research. So it can be physical, it can be digital, it can be quantitative, it can be qualitative. So some examples of this is survey results, transcripts, images, audio, code, software, notebooks, specimens. Pretty much anything can be data, essentially. These can be broadly categorized into raw data, so data that has not yet been processed, so that could just be raw instrument readings. Then we have processed data, so data that has been cleaned, analysed and put into some sort of structure. We have derived data, which could then be translated through into models, simulations or visualizations. And then we might have published data, which is specific data sets linked to a publication. So each of those are types of data, and each of them are things that we could share, and we need to consider how we might want to build that practice into our processes as we move forward. So some examples of the different stages here across that research life cycle is in the very beginning of our research planning project planning process. We might draft our data management plan. We might have a look at the protocols that we want to use. We could share those. We could also look at data collection, sharing surveys, the experiment views. We can have a look at the analysis, the scripts and the clean data. We've got publications for any of our supplementary data sets, and then we have preservation right at the end for depositing that data into the repository. So at every stage of that research process, from planning through to preservation, we can be considering how we handle and share our data. Now, of course, there are reasons that we need to carefully consider how we manage our data. These include legal, ethical and funder requirements. Those are the sort of the big compliance ones that we need to tick off. There might be specific purposes that we're running our research. It might be human in nature. We have all these considerations that we need to build into our planning and life cycle process of how we're going to be sensitively, securely handling that data and preserving it, whether or not that is for sharing with the wider community or whether that's just preservation for your own research practices. When we talk about data and handling it and sharing it and considering how we process it, one of the sort of wider conversations that has really come to the front in the last sort of 10 years or so is around reproducibility and that sort of research integrity. If we do have the capacity to evidence how we are approaching our research and gathering our data, and we can share some of it feasibly and reasonably, it builds this trust, it builds the integrity that we have in our research, and it enables better and faster research if we are able to have our research be reproduced and adapted, and you know, sharing that raw information can help speed up the process for somebody else's research. So it's helping support collaboration and just broad transparency. And that is a really good thing because it increases the visibility of you and your work and the impact of your work. So the more things that you are able to share and do so correctly, the more citations you will get and the more people reaching out to you you will get. So there are some real benefits to being able to share that information with others, as well as all the nice things of like ethical, moral goodness, which I'm a big fan of. But if you also get like acknowledged as part of that, then it's always a good thing. Okay, so the common challenges, there are many, there are a few, and it really comes down to, for me, a bit of digital hygiene. And if that's not a familiar term to you, it's basically this idea of keeping your processes, your files clean and tidy. The amount of data ones and file twos and everything just being auto named by the computer program, it's not ideal, and that's how we get lost files. We just cannot find what was that file. Is that the most updated file? Can't find it. It's gone forever. We don't have clear version controls. Is this the one that was edited last week or the week before? Again, we've got a real lack of naming conventions, and it's really common. You're not a bad person if you're doing it, but it can get in the way of us coming back to our data later on, and if we wanted to share it or we needed to access it for some reason, we'll kick ourselves for not having better digital hygiene in our naming conventions. And similarly, I think, and I'm guilty of this, I think, I'll remember that process. I'll remember why I did that. Why have I highlighted that column in that pink colour? Poor documentation of our data sets, not including a sort of readme type information or just a notes field of something in a tab, if it's Excel or whatever document your software you're using. Love the optimism, but 6 months later you come back to it and you think, don't know why I did that. Why have I bolded that, or why have I used that formula, or where's that thing gone? Why have I made that decision? Being able to write down your thinking, write down your process, writing down why you made the decisions you did is not only useful for yourself as a researcher to come back to, but will also be helpful if you want to progress that data to being shareable and consumed by someone else. And ultimately, just sharing raw data or process data or whatever, just sharing data in and of itself is not helpful if there are no context clues to help the reader pick that data up and use it themselves. Just having the stats is great, but what does it mean? What's the context here? So we really need to be able to support others in reproducing the analyses that we came to by documenting our process, whether in a separate file or in a tab or in some other way. And similarly, we have to consider copyright. I know, terrifying, but it's not too bad. There are a certain set of Creative Commons licenses which have been created to be really friendly, really easy to use. You can go on creativecommons.com and they have a license tool and you can select the options that suit you best. Our recommendation in the library is always to go for the most open, which is CC by 4.0, which is typically, so long as you acknowledge me, it can be shared. Asterisks, check with your funders, check with your rules, regulations, policies, processes, but we can advise you. come and chat to me and I can help you with getting the correct license applied to whatever product it is that you would like to share. By having a appropriate license applied to your data or to anything that you would like to share, you are ensuring that the people who want to use it can do so correctly and safely under the law, which is always a nice thing. And we want to make sure that our data is accessible. So we'll touch on this a little bit later, but or I think we do. But there's a common adage, phrase, acronym called FAIR when we talk to data, which specifically ties into this last problem of data stored on personal devices. Curse you, personal devices. We're looking at, particularly when we look at outputs, you'll start to see data availability statements. Those are becoming more and more common, more and more proliferated, more and more expected, particularly by funders and governing bodies. And what we want is to have those files be available on some sort of public platform, such as a repository, because you might lose the file, I might not be able to contact you. It just makes things way more complicated if we have that data that we want to share only available on a personal device. So these are common challenges. There are definitely ways around them, and some of them it just takes a little bit of planning, which takes us through into data management plans. Most people definitely do a data management plan. It is expected as part of the sort of research process, and you know, in them you'll outline how you're going to collect your data, how it's going to be organised, stored and backed up and shared and preserved. The thing that I like to focus on here is that it's typically done at the start of that research cycle, and then we might not really think about it again. However, I encourage you to think of it as a dynamic document, so something that is updated as the project develops. So use it as a living process. How am I collecting my data? How am I storing my data? Am I considering the preservation process? And you can make notes either on a separate document or the DMP itself or a copy of it, so that you can refer back to it as you're moving forward, as you're making decisions. If you build in thinking about openness, this is the point where we really need to consider that. I did see a hand go up. Do shout out if you would like to ask a question, or you can pop it in the chat as well. I'll open the chat on screen. I'm doing this on my little laptop and it squishes everything, which is lovely. Cool. Okay. I will continue, but do stop me. I'm a bit hyper today, so I do apologise. But if I'm going too quickly, let me know and I will try and slow down a little bit. Okay, so I have to say, benefits of DMPs. There are benefits. We, of course, want to be thinking about at the start of the process how we are going to tackle the challenge of gathering data. So anticipating those potential issues early. How are we going to identify them? Who are we going to engage with? What mitigations are we going to put in place? That will hopefully help us to save time as we move throughout the project. If we already know that Jodie is the librarian who supports depositing data at the end of the cycle, and Billy Bob from IT is the person we need to talk to about getting that secured, private OneDrive storage access for whilst the data is live. It just makes that process a little bit easier if we know the routes that we need to go down as we're progressing through them. Of course, we have evidence of our compliance that we're going through, so we're meeting those requirements. And if we are working with collaborators, we are having clarity so that we all know the expectations for that data collection process collectively. So we all agree before we submit that DMP. Okay, so brief introduction into data, all the different data types, data management plans, that sort of start of the process. I'm going to skip forward now into the post data collection phase. I am talking with IT on how they engage with supporting live data, but as a librarian in the library, we are focused on that post collection. So support with DMPs, and then into that sort of, once you've got all your data and you've done all the good stuff with it, let's move into preserving it. Love a little bit of preservation. I like giving people access to information. I don't think that's a surprise as a librarian, you know. It's nice to be able to share things. Hey. Okay, so what is a repository? Why would we want to use one? Well, essentially, Repositories are trusted platforms for storing and sharing outputs, different types of research output. So you might have something like an institutional repository. So here at Keele, we have two repositories. We have one called WorkTribe, which is for what we'd call our traditional output. So our journal articles, our books, maybe some conference proceedings are in there. And we also have the Keele Data Repository, which is, does what it says on the tin. We have data that is deposited in there, and that can tie into the WorkTribe process. So obviously data, you typically finish first and then you start working on your output. So you might come to the data repository before submitting to your output repository. There is a tendency, there is a proliferation, there is a preference for subject-specific repositories too. So things like GenBank or the UK Data Service, where you might have knowledge of them in your particular area of studies that you know of, that repository being favoured by your peers. And that is absolutely fine. Or there are generalist repositories such as Zenodo, Figshare, OSF, where pretty much anyone can use them, but they have maybe a bit of a flavour to them of the type of information that you might want to use. And essentially what the repository is doing is offering long-term preservation, citation and discoverability. So I have this thing, I would like to share it with people. Where can I put it? Give it a new home so that it can be discovered by others and used and kept safe for me. So that if I'm moving to different institutions, moving to a different country or whatever it is that we're up to, I know that this product that I want to share is being preserved for me and is looked after by some professionals, and anyone who wants to can find it. So the sort of typical repository submission process is, in the first instance, the researcher prepares the data. So we're looking at documentation to support the use of that data. Only you know how to use this data. We're looking at metadata, so who created it, where was it created, etc. Looking at the files and formats that information can be presented in. Again, thinking about, was this data created on super unique, only known to me software? Or can I convert it into something that is a bit more common that other researchers might have access to? Because if it's super unique and only I have access to this software that I made, perhaps it's not so useful to be sharing the data that way, because who else is going to be able to open that file if it's not readable? Two is to choose your repository. Where would you like your data to live? Is it going to be institutional, subject or generalist? Then you go through the process of depositing the files. Some systems have a submission process. So Keele Data Repository, I ask you to fill in a forms form and I do the deposit on your behalf. Others will let you make that deposit directly yourself. In that process, you will receive a persistent digital object identifier, a DOI, a persistent identifier, which is a little bit like an ISBN on a book. It's a unique code that only resolves to your product. So unlike a URL, which can be updated and changed and get lost and breaks all the time, a DOI is persistent in a system and it only resolves to your product. So wherever you go, if you use that unique code, it will only direct the audience to your product. So it's persistent on the internet, which is really the goal, because things on the internet got lost all the time. And then you have the capacity to link your data set to any publications that you might want to be sharing, or any projects that you have. If you have a personal website, if you have an ORCID, if you have LinkedIn, wherever you go, you can say, here is my data set and here is how you can access it. I'm just going to take a brief segue into metadata. Give me a thumbs up if you have heard of metadata before. Couple of thumbs up. Okay. So just in case you haven't, it's the data about the data. So when we have a file, for example, I want to know not what is in the file. I want to know who created the file. So who is the author? Is there a title? When was it published? Is there a date? Is there an edition? If we're thinking about books is the typical example here. So when we come into thinking of metadata in terms of data, we want to know who the creators are, what was the methodology, what file format have we got, is there any keywords that can help to find this product, what license has been applied to it, is there a related publication, maybe an output that I could go look at. And sometimes you'll see that presented in the file format in and of itself again. So coming back to that concept of digital hygiene, of how can I support the reader in finding this file and understanding what the file is. Okay, cool. So what I call got data, now what? How do you choose a repository? It's a bit of a, personal question because there's not really a wrong answer. Repositories are available in many locations, in many formats, and it depends on if there's been one specified as part of your DMP process that has had to be signed off, or if you have full autonomy to make your own decisions. Again, it's if you talk to colleagues, you talk to peers, you talk to supervisors, and they say, oh yes, we typically use a subject repository, here it is, then by all means go forth with that one. If no one has a preference, maybe consider the Kiel Data Repository. I'll come on to that in a second. But what you want to be considering really is, are there any disciplinary norms? Is it normal to use Figshare for sharing our data or our products? Is there any sensitive data restrictions? What workflows are in place? Does that repository enable authentication or further communication? Is there some level of restriction in place for the ethical safeguarding of sensitive materials? Is there a storage limit? Sometimes we have to pay a fee if it's over a certain gigabyte, 10 billion trilobytes, whatever. Sometimes there are storage limits to what we can share, so that might be a consideration for us. Some repositories automatically assign DOIs, some do not. Is that a thing that is important to you? And what are the rules and regulations about how long they will preserve your materials for? So just have a look at what is being offered. Does it meet your needs? Absolutely fine. A small plug for the Kiel Data Repository. We're a pretty small repository at the moment. We did launch about 5 years ago, but we've had a very gentle rise. But we are encouraging more and more Kiel staff and students to consider submitting to the repository. It's a really simple process. If you go to the Library Research Support SharePoint, you can find the submission forms form and pop in all of the information that is requested to make your metadata fields. And I am your lead contact for that process. So if I have any queries or questions, I get back to you pretty quickly, I will say, and can support you with that deposit. So sometimes it's beneficial to have someone at the institution supporting you through that process. Or, I think so anyway. Okay, so just again to recap, when we're looking at data sharing, it's really important that we do consider what type of Creative Commons license we would like to apply. We want to make sure that the data has been sufficiently anonymized if that is an element of your research. If there is anything sensitive that needs anonymizing, make sure you've done that. And we want to be following really the FAIR guidelines. So can I find the metadata record Is the file downloadable? Is it accessible? Is it presented in a file format that is interoperable? So again, is it like in a CSV type file, or is it something that's super unique? And reusable comes back to that rights conversation. Do I have the right to reuse this information? Excuse me. Okay. So just to talk through the sort of process that we would typically go through is we collect the interview data, for example. We are going to go through and anonymize and document the process that we've gone through. We want to look at depositing the data into a repository, getting that DOI, and then we have that DOI to share. So it's pretty straightforward. And again, it's up to you to decide what data at what point in that research process you want to share it. Are we happy to share raw data? Do we want to share processed data? There are different stages at which you could share that information, and you could have different records for the different stages that you move through. Oh, I should have moved this slide forward. That'll teach me. Have you guys heard of FAIR data before? Give me a thumbs up if you have. Yeah, okay, one or two people. Yeah, it's becoming more and more common anytime we talk about data sharing to also refer to FAIR data. And that again is because although there's been this push of sharing data and an increase in data availability statements on research outputs, typically that has led to people including statements such as email me to request the data, which is fine, but not great. So if we can move towards having things in repositories, we can use keyword searching, we can have things that are accessible and separate from a personal OneDrive. It just makes the whole process so much easier, and it brings back in that sort of confidence of the wider public and people looking at research and saying, is it reliable, is it trustworthy, is it ethical, all these things, if we can evidence that there are better processes in place, such as using repositories and DOIs, and the FAIR data is a easy to follow process through which we can access all of that information. So one slide that I did want to include here is how do we translate this into practical steps? Because sometimes we love an acronym, but sometimes we want to know, but what are the actual steps that we want to go through? So when we talk about findable, I want DOIs, I want keywords, I want it to be accessible. Is it in a trusted repository, not just some random OneDrive file? Is it interoperable? So what format is that software in, and is it reusable? Has a license been applied, and is it very clear which license it is? Okay. One of the tensions that we have when we talk about data is that it's not always shareable. There are absolutely times where it's not safe, it's not permitted, or there is restrictions that need to be put in place. So it's sensitive data that should only go to a trusted researcher, not just shared for everyone. So the common phrase that we add to this concept is as open as possible and as closed as necessary. So possible approaches to support that is anonymization, which is great. Absolutely is that. We can use controlled access. So here at Keel, we have the sensitive data workflow, which is a process that we've implemented to support specifically the medical side of our researchers who are obviously dealing with human data, and part of their mandates, part of their funder agreements is that this data is shared, but done so in a safe way. Okay, so that kind of comes with data access agreements and metadata only records. So sometimes we want it to be findable, but not necessarily immediately accessible. And then we have professionals who can make that decision on request of another researcher to have access to that material. So it just depends on what you have, which is available, what type of research you've done. If you have any dates, come and have a chat with me and we can figure out the best path forward. Okay, quick question for you to type into the chat. Which of these counts as research data? Okay, is it spreadsheets, interview transcripts, code, lab notebooks, images? Is it any? Is it all? Is it a couple? Let me know what you think. Yeah, yeah, you are correct. It's all of them. Yeah. So absolutely all of them can are research data. So you could share your spreadsheets, you could share your interview transcripts, your code, your lab notebooks, your images. All of these things can be shared and deposited into a repository. Okay. So I feel like I have absolutely whizzed through this, so apologies if I've been a bit quick. Just excited. But we can help and be a bit calmer about it, maybe. So the library can help by offering general advice on data management plans. So we can talk about the concepts of data management plans, the general approaches that you might take. We're not subject specialists in every area, unfortunately, but it might be that you want to come and have a chat with us just to get the gist of how to start one before going off and making it more unique and specialised in your area. Of course, we can offer repository, deposit guidance, metadata support, licensing advice, and we can offer training on fair and general open research practices. If you are keeping track on your research and development frameworks, this session specifically relates to Domain 2, research, governance and organisation, and Domain 3, engagement, influence and impact. Yeah. So in this session, we have touched on research data, DMPs, repositories to preserve and share research outputs, and the skills that are covered under the RDF. If you do want any additional support in any of these areas, obviously you can come to the library to access support materials. There's also external products such as the UK Data Service. Love them, they're great. The Digital Curation Centre and just generally the library research team. Got my teeth in today. Some additional links which should be clickable, but you never know. Yeah, it seems to be working. So additional links there are available to you, and again all of those are available through the library website as well. All right, does anyone have any questions? What I'll do is I'll stop the recording, and if you do you can ask them. If not, lovely. Let me just stop the recording fast so that we can talk.